If you're a creative person and you're making music and putting it out there, I've got nothing but respect for you. If you think stuff like this sounds kind of cool, it'd be awesome if you would hit that subscribe button so we can all have this conversation together. So the problem is this. Doesn't sound a lot like this. Step one, if you're not a drummer, then you don't really know the little things that drummers do to create shape. So best choice is have a drummer play it on electric pads like what I'm doing, or there's patterns in virtual instruments lots of times. There's little Midi things that you can pull into your DAW, and those are often played by drummers. Then they have the right shapes and feels to them, and you can select and you can piece them together and make things work for your song. Then you'll get a musical experience that'll just feel, well, it's just way more musical and way more emotionally engaging. Step two, quantizing. Now, I feel like people get into trouble here when they quantize everything like really and make all the velocities the same. So here's my playing right down here. You can see it's not exactly, right on the grid. So I'd like to tighten that up a little bit. So here's what I would suggest you do. In Logic, you can go up here, you can quantize it to the 16th note. There's a strength thing right here. Normally, if you don't touch it, it'll be 100%. You can see it disappears. I suggest you go back to 60, 70%, something like that, and you can see how it's gotten closer. Now here's the playing. What I like about this is the relationship between, say, these two things don't stay completely the same. So this one, you can see, it's hard to get super close. It's not the same relationship as this exactly. So I want it to be tight so that you don't feel like it's out of time. I want it to be really in the pocket. And then by not making the velocities exactly the same because I played it in, and by not just making them all at 100%, you get a fluidity to the playing that sounds natural. Well, because I played it and then I fixed the timing up, but I haven't made it 100%, so you get a nice fluid musical feeling. That's what I would suggest. Step three is select the right sounds. Not any acoustic drums will work in any acoustic drum setting, and drums define the genre. Here's an example. Those are cool acoustic drums. They're kind of like a funk kind of a sound. So in the setting of this song, that really doesn't work. So I'm using a more of a rock style kit, which is from the Slate collection. Both great sounds, but I've chosen something is fitting. So listen to some records that sound like what your song sounds like, and get in the zone and try and find something that defines the genre, that feels right, that resonates with what you're doing. So the other thing I've done is I've pulled up this one, it's Accent Drums. So this is by Space Cabin Audio. This is a really cool plugin, and I know Chris very well, the guy who made this. This was recorded at Blue Wave Studios in Vancouver, which is no longer here, so this is a treasure. And this is a model of the API board. This whole drum set was recorded in that room. He made a whole collection all through that famous API board, which at one point I understand the Doobie Brothers owned. So here is that drum set. Also a really good choice. What I've done to create my own thing is I combine elements from the two different kits. So I like the Slate kit and I like the Galaxy Drums kit. I combine different pieces of them, and I feel like that does two things. One, it gives me a bigger sonic landscape. It sounds bigger to me. And also, I feel like I'm doing something that's not on everybody else's record because it's slightly my own formula. The other thing I am doing is I am adding in samples. So those are some of the samples that I'm adding in. You'll hear them more when I do the mix. When you combine the samples, which are a bit more static, but the drums, which are a bit more moving around, the quantizing is the same. I copy the Midi down. Even though I'm using samples, I get that more musical flowing kind of feeling that I'm looking for. I know I'm flipping into Pro Tools here and faking you out, but I'm going to finish this song in Pro Tools, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing with the plugins. It would be the same if it was in Logic or in Pro Tools, so just don't tell anybody. So 4 is mixing, and I've thought long and hard about how to be useful with this because mixing is so huge, and I can't teach you how to mix drums in like 3 minutes. But what I thought I'd do is run through what I've done to each of the sounds, but give you some go-tos. So altogether, here's where I have the drums now, and I'm not finished this mix, but here's where I am now, and I think they sound pretty good. So let me just run through these. Here's the first one. This is the Chris Lord Algae sample. I printed 2, I'm only using 1. I try and whittle it down. I throw a bunch of stuff in, I play with the Play-Doh, wiggle things around, and I don't use what I don't need. So you don't need to just, it's not better just because it's louder. So here, it's not actually playing a major role. You got to learn to play with this stuff a little bit, but the main thing I'm doing is boosting a lot of high end. And in this one, 5K, that's actually not my go-to. I'll show you the Galaxy drum. This is really, I think, the really typical thing that I do. And I stole most of this from what Chris Lord Algae does. So 8K on a kick drum, 7.5, 8K somewhere in there. Really, without it, what that does is it really provides a lot of definition that sounds really bright, but in the context of the mix, it creates a whole ton of definition. Let's listen to it in the mix. It really punches through. The other thing I'm doing, attack pretty slow so the transient can get through, and they're released fast so the compressor recovers before the next hit. So it's not recovering all the way, but it's recovering pretty fast. And you see that the needle's going halfway up, but it's only getting like 3-4 dB of gain reduction. It's not a ton. You don't need to murder it. So let me go on to the next thing. Snare top. 6.5, 7, 8K. I started 8K as my go-to frequency. It just creates a lot of brights. It's not a high impact part of the frequency, but it creates a lot of clarity and a lot of energy. I feel like boring is your enemy here. Without the EQ, with the EQ, and then compression. Again, getting a little over 3 dB of gain reduction, almost the same as on the kick drum. The release is a little bit faster. In the context, again, it just really, it makes it cut through, but the compressor knocks down a bit of the edge of the sound. It just sounds very energized without being harsh. Bottom. Use bottom for brightness. I'm not hitting it that hard. I've added a pile of 12K to it. I'm just looking for sizzle and energy there. It doesn't need to be high impact. Next thing, there's the sample. So the sample does a couple things. It's girthy, it's got a lot of mid-range in it. Again, I've probably brightened it. Not much. The sample is already bright enough. That's what it sounds like. And then the next thing I used is this ambient snare. So without it, put it in. So it's a lot of kind of like white noise. It really creates size on that snare drum. Hi-hat. I really haven't done much. I took a little mid-range out of it. I think I probably did that to just make it not compete with the vocal. So yeah, there's some context there. Toms. Now, on the VI drums, the virtual instrument drums, it tends to be the case that they don't sound crappy. I didn't feel like I needed to EQ them individually in this case, so here they are. Not lots going on. Again, here's the EQ. I brightened up 5.5 a lot, and I pulled out a bunch of 550. That was a lot. Even brighter here. If I don't have enough, or this is kind of like a wider band than this one, just lots of definition, lots of energy. So here's what's interesting. Let's go through the overheads. You can see what I've done with the EQ. I've brightened them up quite a bit. I know it sounds crazy, but what I've done here also, and I got this from something that Chris Lord Alge does, is I've added a pile of 60 hertz. And I hadn't seen anybody do that. I've been doing this for a few years now. Listen to the size. Here's the rooms. I compressed them, but I didn't murder them. Again, added a lot of bottom end. I know. That's a good trick. And then what I did was the Galaxy overheads. So I find with virtual drums, one of the things they don't have that real drums often has is the sonic sort of messiness that makes it sound alive and natural. So I often do this. I printed overheads and rooms from both VIs and I blended them in. And in this case, again, lots of size. I'm doing almost the same thing as to the other ones. And then these rooms from the Galaxy drums, I think is what really, really brings it all together. So I murdered these in the compressor. Yeah. I gave them some size, and I know that sounds really ridiculous, but Distressor, this is a famous, famous, famous sound. So I'm going to start it, and then a couple bars in, I'm going to add it. Watch here, and you'll just feel the size come alive. Here we go. That bottom end just wants, it's just stank face all the way. I love that. And then the last thing I want to have a look at is the drum bus. So compression is making the biggest difference here. Without the compression, still feels good. Listen to the snare. See how it's affecting the length of the snare? It just makes it feel bigger. It reels everything in, makes everything sound like it's hitting a little bit harder. The last thing I'm doing, I've got a crusher here. Without it, with it, put your headphones on. It might seem a little bit subtle, but in the goo of the whole song, you know what I mean, the sonic soup, it really adds depth and dimension to it. It just makes the sounds, I guess it just makes them feel like there's more depth and more size to everything. The last point is you've gotten this far, you're pretty happy with how everything sounds, so 5 is reference. Pull up another song that sounds like it's in the same genre as what you're doing. You think you've got it, and then you put something else on, and it's really kicking your butt. So people do have a certain expectation. That's even why you're here listening to this. You have an expectation of what you would like a record to sound like. It's not always easy to get there. I hope this helps you out. If you thought that was kind of cool, give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. I would love to have a discussion about this. Lots and lots of people have really, really great ways of making drums sound awesome. And of course, I'm learning all the time. So share something. Let's have a conversation. See you guys next time.